So this edition of SIGEF is an edition where the private sector is a little bit more involved because as an engine of contribution from an economic development, we have as well a responsibility for the legacy and footprint that we convey in the development of our respective entities. In the room, we have people from the multi-stakeholder level, because that circular approach is the way and the best way in an humble approach to learn from each other and to find the point of synergies, the point of value creation, and not only economically speaking. The real value is the value of life. When I had the chance to learn about the project of Watergen, for instance, water from the sky. This is like a beautiful story that can make dreams many generations to come at a time where we say that water will be one of the key challenges in the century we are starting over. Having, like entities like Nespresso, Philip Morris at our side give us the strength to continue and carry it out with the conviction that every day we will be able to build up more momentum, to connect for good, and to build a more sustainable and inclusive world. So with all your presence today and the presence of the people on our network with the live stream of this conference, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your opening. Thank you for the art and passion that is moving you to this place, and thank you for all what you will be able to build in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. All together, let's say a great, start for this 7th edition of SIGEF and the 1st edition of SIGEF Davos. Thank you very much, everyone.
Say 1, 2, 3. SIGEF is open. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, without further ado, I'd like to call upon the panelists for our very first panel on disruptive technologies for a smarter future. And just to give you a brief description of what this panel will be about, in all aspects of our lives, technology is playing a greater and greater role. But for a technology to be truly disruptive, we have to make sure that it bears the promise of inclusion and conscious development. For that, it will take a correlation of financial, social, and scientific advances to make sure that the positive impact, there is a positive impact for the world. So with that said, I'd like to explore this topic with our panelists. I will call them out one by one. Zach Fenster, the Chief of Staff of the Office of Executive Chairman at Watergen. Welcome, Zach, to the stage. Thank you. We have Nikolaus Lang, Boston Consulting Group. He's a Managing Director and Senior Partner and Global Lead of the Mobility Practice. Welcome. We have Xiaochen Zhang, FinTech and Blockchain Expert and Influencer, and the President of FinTech for Good. Welcome. And finally, Mr. Adi Mimran. He's a Venture Partner at Cyrus Venture Partners, coming all the way from Israel. Thank you. Well, I think this is us, so I will move down a chair so there's not a big gap. Well, let's kick it off. I think it'd be really helpful. So we're going to be really tight time masters here because we've got a lot to get through this morning. So we'll just have about 40 minutes. I'd love to have a really short introduction each. I'm going to hold you to just a minute or two. And let's start at the end with Adi. But if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your organization and what you're doing here.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I've been involved in the Israeli high-tech ecosystem for the past 20 years. I've done a lot of roles from entrepreneurship to fundraising to angel investments and recently also venture capital. I'm also an executive member of the International Peace Accelerator, which is a multinational organization that aims to bring peace to the Middle East by using a Silicon Valley approach and a different way of doing negotiation for peace. Basically, Cyrus is a venture capital that is focused on AI, artificial intelligence. We're very excited about it because we really believe that it's going to be implemented in every aspect of our life.
Fantastic. Let's go down the line.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And my name is Xiaochen Zhang, I'm the president of FinTech for Good. And I'm also serving on the executive council of UN ASCAP, ESPN. This is in the body that's the private sector help UN to achieve the goals. And my own background is really starting from teaching at the Peking University and then just working for UN Secretary General Climate Change Support Team, then working for World Bank, and then move to the private sector using our innovative innovation ecosystem to help fintech and blockchain company to do good. And later I will just give you a few examples. And the interesting thing is that the technology is really constrain how we act, also constrain how we imagine. And in the past few years we have worked with a lot of very exciting blockchain fintech-based solutions which are addressing the 17 SDG goals. And we prepared a special Davos magazine edition, and which highlighted some of the blockchain for impact projects. And after the event, I prepared a few copies. If you're interested, happy to give it to you. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Zhao. Then now on to Nikolaus.
Yes. My name is Nikolaus Lang. I'm a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group. I've been working for BCG now for 24 years, and I've always been working in what we call the automotive and mobility area, which obviously has, I think, a big challenge on the topic of sustainability and growth. I have a specific area which I've focused on, which is the autonomous driving. I'm actually part of the WEF's Global Mobility Council, which is a group of 12 experts thinking about the future of mobility. And when you think that consultants only produce PowerPoint slides, well, that's wrong. We have actually been working together with the WEF and the City of Boston in launching real autonomous cars, and I'm very pleased to share these experiences afterwards.
Great, look forward to diving in. Finally, Zach.
Hi, so you were just given an amazing introduction, I think, to Watergen by Dr. Mirilashvili. I'll just say that if we have a representative of the Israeli tech industry up here, I don't think that there is a better example of Israeli innovation, global leading innovation, but more importantly, global leading innovation for the good of humanity and for the good of the world, right? I think we, especially in our day and age, tend to glorify technology as an end unto itself. And I think especially this session is so important because it shows that really technology should be seen as a means and not as an end. So it's an honor to be here with you today. Thank you for being with us. We have a short 60-second video, I believe, as an introduction, if it's set up. If not, then we can get back to it. It is. There should be sound. If not, then I can provide the narration here. So what you saw before were a couple of just installations. This is showing one of our machines. This is a mid-scale machine which produces 800 liters a day. And what this is showing you is how we suck in the air, clean the air. This is our core technology, what we call the genius, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second when we discuss the actual technical aspects. But suffices to say that this is the most efficient heat exchanger and water extractor out there. And as you can see, what we're showing here is that we have a range of products and that there are endless applications, be it homes, offices, schools, hospitals, police stations, big residential buildings, towns, mobile, which we could get to in a second, both on-grid and off-grid, works with any power source, solar, electrical, wind, or generator. So it's an incredibly flexible and scalable solution.
Okay, Zach, why don't we start with you since we've just had the setup with the video.
Sure.
We'll keep it brief though to get through everything, but I am curious, it looks like it takes the water from the air, so presumably humidity, and it turns that into clean drinking water. Talk about some of the challenges. What happens in a very arid or dry climate? Is this technology feasible there?
Sure, great. So just as to sort of pull back for 1 second and situate where we are, you know, it sounds crazy to create drinking water from the air, but of course this is the most sort of ancient process there is, and it starts in the sky, right? God invented it originally. That's what happens in rain, right? Hot, humid air meets cold air. And then there's condensation, the clouds get heavy, and it rains. And that's been our source of water for the beginning of mankind. And of course, this is increasingly difficult for all sorts of reasons, be it the climate change, the rise in global population, etc. What we were able to do at Watergen is essentially take that core process, right, of condensation, as you said. We like to call it water extraction, and harness it and scale it. And the core invention, the core technology that allows us to do that is that genius that I mentioned behind me. The genius, like I said, is a heat exchanger. And when you talk about heat exchangers in the world, there's nothing more simple and more sort of native to the industrial world, right? You'll find heat exchangers in dehumidifiers, in air conditioners, in all sorts of appliances that we know from our everyday lives. What we were able to do, and I think some of the most powerful technological innovations are actually also some of the most simple, and I think this is a good example of that, is that we were able to essentially reinvent that heat exchanger. And that's important to get to your question for a few main reasons. The first is that if you take that heat exchanger and you put it in a desert, right, it's not really going to create much moisture because that's not its purpose, and it doesn't have the technological ability. What our genius heat exchanger can do is utilize even the smallest amounts of moisture in the air in order to produce the maximum amount of water that is possible for that atmosphere. So for example, I can tell you that I've been in desert regions in the Gulf, in the Caucasus, and in all sorts of very dry areas, and even as low as 15% humidity, we were able to create meaningful amounts of water.
Excellent. We'll come back to learn more, but thank you for that teaser. I do want to go down the line now to Nikolaus. You work for BCG, you're up on trends. I'd love to kind of get a sense of where we are with autonomous vehicles, not just with the technology, but also with the ethical piece, because I know that is an interesting piece to figure out before this technology goes mainstream.
Well, I think when you look at autonomous driving, I think there's always three discussions. One is the technological discussion. The second one is what you said, the ethical discussion. And I think the third one is the discussion around, I would say, the social impact. So, so the technical discussion, I think, is pretty advanced. Yeah, I think we have seen over the last 10 years various startups running cars in which you put mono and stereo cameras, you put laser, you put radar, you put odometry, and so today we have more than 200 pilots around the world where actually fully autonomous cars or shuttles are driving around. So I think the problem of technology is not the big one. I think the big problem you have is whether you have these cars or these vehicles running in a geofenced controlled environment, or whether you think that these cars have to handle each and every situation that they might encounter. So I think that's the big question. So I think from our perspective, in the next 5 years, we will have autonomous vehicles in clearly geofenced areas running, that can be airports, that can be big power plants, that can be big factories and things like this. Now, the second question which we have here is then the question around what you just mentioned, the ethical question, or the whole question around how do we get these cars on the road, and especially how do we make sure that they are safer than humans. And I think I had yesterday a long discussion with one of the CEOs of the biggest mobility providers in the world, and obviously there is a clear view that if you want to make business models of Uber, of Lyft, of Yandex, of Careem, of Grab, of Didi work, there will need to be at the moment in time some kind of autonomous driving happening. That can only happen if this autonomous driving is safer than humans. Now coming to the social impact, and I think that's why I'm so much driven by the idea of autonomous driving. Sarah, you just mentioned at the beginning here, we're talking about sustainability, about inclusiveness, about empowerment. Well, sustainability, if we have a city with autonomous cars, we need 50% less parking spaces. In the city of New York, that translates to 900 blocks of free parking space. If we have fully autonomous cars, 96% of all accidents, casualties will disappear, because 96% of all accidents we have today are human failure. So I think there is a very clear impact in terms of, and obviously all these shuttles will be driven electrically, so we will have obviously currently a drop of 80% of CO2 emissions through the value chain. So the impact, I think, on sustainability is huge. The impact on inclusiveness is also huge, because we have today, and I just like to quote Mayor Walsh from Boston, with whom we did this pilot. He said one of the key drivers to do autonomous driving is that we have in Boston 15% of the population that is either too young, too old, too poor, or too handicapped to use public mobility. If you have autonomous shuttles that come in front of your door and pick you up, that's a total different approach of inclusiveness.
Fixes the last mile problem. What about quickly the issue of long-haul truck drivers? Reskilling?
Well, again, I think that's a topic of reskilling, but also let's be also aware, and I think that's the problem with autonomous driving, this will be a gradual shift. We will not switch cars from non-autonomous to autonomous in 5 to 10 years. I think this is a generational pattern where, yes, I think I would not tell my son to become truck driver or taxi driver, because I think in 50 years from now that will not be a profession to follow, at least in most part of the world, not in every. But I don't expect that shift to happen somewhere 1st of January 2032, we change the switch and everyone drives autonomously. That's not going to happen.
Helpful to understand the timeline. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Xiaochen, let's talk about fintech now. What are some of the things that you're most excited about, and what are the challenges? What do we really have to overcome as a society to get to the next level?
Yeah, and I will start from a recent conversation I had with the United Nations Secretary General's Digital Financing for SDG Task Force. And the task force brought, a number of like 15 experts together for a 3-day closed-door meeting. And the interesting part is that when we talk about the SDG financing, we're talking about the gap, and more than like 7 trillion financing gap. Where does money come from? And can we just push the private sector? Can we push the country? Can we push the individual? That might not work, because we have to find alternatives. Where can we just mobilize additional funding and also make the existing funding much more cost effective? So that's where digital technology, blockchain, play an important role. And one of the key findings from that group was that we are talking about citizen-centered financing, which is enabled by the digital technology, meaning that before, without the digital technology, that individuals can only take the role as a consumer. Other than that, very inactive in the financial system. But now that, with Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital identity, and smart contract, and individuals becoming the center of financial system. What does that mean? Individuals have more than 6 trillion as savings in their pocket. And they cannot, without digital technology, and these savings will stay in the bank, just having even negative interest. But now that with all the digital technologies, we already seen that in many countries, the pilots are there. And for example, like Binance have this impact token launched in supporting people in Ghana to buy sanitation products. People can just send money token directly to support that with next to zero cost. And several countries issued a national digital identity with the identity, and now that's nobody will worry about that public money will go to the bad hands and then being wasted. And with the blockchain-based tracing and tracking technology, that we are seeing that, because I'm a Chinese, so I will just give a few Chinese examples. Several banks started to just working with the government to disseminate the public funding or poverty reduction subsidies to individuals, farmers, and in a much more effective way. And then, when I was provided training in some areas, the local rural head of the village came to me as, we are happy now that we can ask our farmers to really go to, the system, see that you can go to see the record there, and I didn't do any corruption there, and I'm clean. So before blockchain, it cannot be done. And in general speaking, that's with blockchain technology and other, emerging technology, we have seen that number one is that citizens are becoming the center of financial system. That actually provide this new mindset and a new business model creation for the business, how you react to that. Number two is that, now that we have a better tool in just channeling, mobilizing and reduce cost in SDG financing. Number three, that although, we are in the stage of seeing all those great things, digital technology also creates or even potentially can increase the digital divide, meaning that there will be people left behind if the design is not in the center at this stage. So that's why we definitely need to just address all these challenges and then to harvest other opportunities. And I have included some case studies in this magazine. Yeah, thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Xiaochen. And finally, Andy. I'm curious, I'm sure you're scouting every day interesting AI startups. What do you look for in those companies? Which ones are going to take off? What can we expect from the future of AI?
So my personal passion is life-saving applications, life-saving technologies. So a lot of the companies I look at are in the digital health field. Digital health and AI goes very well together because AI helps to detect, to diagnose, and to monitor diseases in a very efficient and you can call it disruptive way, sometimes even without the intervention of a doctor. So I'll give an example. A company in Israel called HT Bioimaging. The founder is a very passionate entrepreneur called Chani, and her father passed away with cancer. And she was really frustrated with the situation that they did not detect it on time. Like 45% of the cancer situations. So she invented a radiation-free technology for early detection of cancer in the community, basically based on physics, heat diffusion technology that basically goes through the tissues, and the AI identifies the cancerous tissues as opposed to the regular tissues. So it's a very accurate methodology, been tested already in hospitals, and the FDI clearance is very, very short, in the short future. And this is an example of how every communal doctor will be able to detect cancer in a very early stage. This can affect tens of millions of people in the world. Another example is a company called Oxyton that has medical grade monitoring capability for oxygen blood saturation, which is again related to lung problems, to heart failures, etc. So by that, they're able to give the patient the freedom to be at home, do what he does regularly, and the physician will call him if his blood level, if his oxygen level deteriorates. He will get a call, come to the clinic, you have a problem, and he will not even have to change his life. So those two examples represent how AI can really affect hundreds of millions of people in the world.
Well, thank you all for sharing really positive impacts of all your technologies and endeavours. You know, if you think about this particular WEF, it's the 50th annual, it's the start of a new decade. 2030 are the goals that the SDGs are targeting, where we hope the world will be radically different, not difficult. So I do want to ask this as a final question. You know, where do you hope to see each of your fields and endeavours in 2030? What would success look like? And we've, as you can see by the clock, we've got just a minute each. So let's go down the line again.
So, you know, there's the question of the technological capacity of a product, and then there's also the idea, penetration we say, but I think more than that, a real mindset shift. And I think much of this morning so far has been about the mindset shift that the people in this room are working towards. I think this past year and this coming year of 2020 is when Watergen's technology is really scaling around the world, and when we're showing to the world in all sorts of different geographies and in all sorts of different use cases that there is an alternative, stable source of clean drinking water that can be scaled, and that can be scaled in a way that also has additional benefits, not only of giving people clean drinking water, but also of helping us to eliminate the scourge of plastic bottles and to give our existent drinking water sources that have been so overstressed time to recuperate and rehabilitate. So in 2030, I see our solution scaled and the real core source of clean drinking water for people everywhere.
Terrific. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, I think on autonomous driving, my view is on 2030, and I'm deliberately conservative, but still I would say that half of the world metropolis above 1 million inhabitants would have at least a central business district or 1/4 of this city fully autonomous with level 4, level 5 shuttles, with the positive impacts on emissions, on parking spaces, on fatalities.
Terrific.
Yeah, and for us, that we definitely want to see that by 2020, that through there will be much better digital infrastructure, and the individuals, nobody is left behind from the banking service, and everyone's banked. And from other goals, that through digital identity and other solutions, and then everyone have basic service need met, by the global new solutions. Yeah.
So basically, in the next couple of years, we will see AI becoming more and more prevalent in all commercial and private applications. I think that it will become much more explainable as of today, which is considered like a black box that gives a conclusion and you don't really know why. So a lot of data scientists are now working on how to make the AI explainable so you can really understand it and have it more transparent, which will create trust among people that will be willing to adopt it. The classic example is autonomous vehicles, because basically you need to trust the car to drive by itself, and it uses a lot of AI in order to make the decisions. So that's the main thing. I think that the big question is when, and I'm not sure that by 2030 we will have it, the artificial general intelligence, which is like the holy grail of the artificial intelligence. I'm not sure it's going to be by 2030, but this is definitely going to create a different way of life, because this kind of intelligence, which is superior to any human intelligence, is basically able to solve most of the world's problems. So imagine a person that has a phone with a AGI inside, basically stop talking about inequalities in society, because he's smarter than everyone in the world at that moment. This is really kind of the vision behind AI, and I'm not sure 2030, but we'll see.
We shall see. Well, thank you all. I want to give a round of applause to all our panelists. It was just the tip of the iceberg. And I will add, time was short. I hope we got a sneak preview into, the future of AI, fintech, mobility, and water. I encourage you all to get to know the panelists in the networking afterwards. We didn't have time for questions for this panel, but maybe future panels we will. So with that, thank you very much. right, well, moving right along, I'd like to introduce our next panel, which will take us a little bit deeper into finance. This panel will be about the future of finance. Is it an accelerator of inclusion? As you think about the wider expansion of fintech and blockchain and related technologies, it does create a whole world of new opportunities. But there's reasons to believe that these financial services will increase transaction speed, accountability, and economic empowerment of women, and the inclusion of nearly 2 billion people who are currently left out of the current financial systems. So here to teach us more about this subject and share their learnings, I'd like to welcome the panelists and moderator for this next panel. So to begin with, Ms. Karen Wilson. She's from the OECD, leading strategic partnerships. Welcome, Karen. We also have Hidetoshi Azuma. He's the Executive Vice President of the Crypto Asset Central Foundation Bank and Cognitive Research Lab. And Ms. Vera Furitaji, Director of Innovation and Partnerships at 500 Startups. And our moderator, Adva Salinger. She is a reporter with DevEx. So please welcome the next panel.
Well, it might just be us three. Well, thank you both for joining us this morning. And I think as we think about the future of finance and how technology is changing how people access finance, there's a lot of really interesting questions that we can get into. And I wanted to just start by asking both of you to tell us a little bit about how, in your work, you're engaging on these issues of financial inclusion and really looking at how technology is going to help the 2 billion people who are currently unbanked access finance.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Hidetoshi Azuma. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Tomabechi, who was originally registered for this conference, but due to family emergency, he couldn't come, so I'm speaking on behalf of him. So our vision is very simple. We like to create what may be called cyber nation, and we're actually creating a coalition of cyber countries, CCC, and this coalition basically already consists of the African diaspora and some other nations as well. And eventually we'd like to create what may be called the Federation of Cyber States, with full sovereignty attached to it. So we believe that this vision of Dr. Tomabechi's will contribute to greater inclusion on a worldwide basis, especially to people and communities that currently do not have territorial control or sovereignty. And with the power of blockchain and cryptocurrency, we hope that we will be able to create a much more inclusive world. So this is basically the project we're working on right now.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Maybe I'll just give a quick introduction. So my name is Vera Furitaji. I'm based in Dubai. And so recently I managed the Middle East and North Africa, so the MENA region and Russia, for a global VC firm called 500 Startups, which is the most active VC firm in early stage investments. I manage it as a director of innovation, so it's all about corporate innovation, ecosystems building, launching accelerators in Riyadh and in Moscow, building the ecosystem of Abu Dhabi. I recently left and I'm working now on building an impact fund, and SDG number one, no poverty, is one of the main ones for my region as well, where I'm based. I'm not Arab. I call it my region just because I've been living there for a long time. So before joining 500 Startups, I worked for Dubai government and built the Dubai Future Accelerators, which is the largest government accelerator that attracts the most innovative companies to come to Dubai and pairs them with different government departments to accelerate innovation. And blockchain companies were part of that as well. And before that, I had my own startup, and before that worked in the EU in Brussels. So yeah, finance and financial inclusion is a very important topic in the region I'm in. There are a lot of unbanked people in the Middle East. So I recently spoke on Egypt, and Egypt is the largest country in the Middle East with a third of the population based there. And that's probably one of the most important topics there as well, next to mobility, because you have to transport a large mass of population. So definitely financial inclusion is very high up on our list, and we'll be making sure that Middle East will be able to take care of their unbanked people going forward, hopefully by 2030.
Great. And I'm curious sort of what challenges both of you see as we're looking at a changing financial system. There's a lot of opportunity in that, but as we're seeing some of these things develop, they're not necessarily developed across all geographies. And there might be more difficulties of accessing cryptocurrencies and things like that in places where there is less access to internet and other resources. And so I'm curious what you see as some of the most significant barriers in helping to expand access to finance, and both how technology and sort of how things are changing could perhaps address those, but how we ensure that there's sort of an inclusive process moving forward.
Well, that's a very good question, and particularly relevant to our vision of creating a federation of cyber states. We would like to cater to especially disenfranchised and isolated people all around the world. So that of course includes people without basic access to the internet or digital infrastructure. However, we like to create a mechanism that would allow them to finance their own sovereign state in cyberspace. And this mechanism basically consists of two steps. One is we're going to introduce digital bond system powered by blockchain technology. And this bond will be basically 1% interest rate on a 30-year basis. And this is going to provide funding for their e-government. And the second step is each cyber nation will basically issue their own cryptocurrency. And at the same time, each of them accepts donation in their own cryptocurrency. So basically, this whole scheme of things doesn't really require considerable funding or basic infrastructure. What we basically need is a power of idea, and this is basically what we trying to fuel this emerging notion of cyber nation. And so this is basically the kind of mechanism we'd like to introduce to this emerging notion of cyber nations.
Well, my view on this is I'm not an expert in cryptocurrency or blockchain, really. I don't think it's at the level yet that we can really help people with that, especially the unbanked people, because you need to do so much education first, right? We need to educate people first, the ones that can help the unbanked, then the unbanked actually get access to it. I also ran an NGO called Techfugees, where you build tech solutions for refugees, and obviously getting access to finance is one of the most important issues for them. I would look at some simpler solutions, and I can give an example of a startups that we invested in, or I invested in when I was with 500 startups. It's a very simple solution. There are a lot of Filipino workers in the UAE, right? So one of a guy who built a startup, a Filipino guy, just decided, how can I actually help, those Filipino workers who all go on a weekly basis, send money home to their husbands or their wives, in the Philippines. So he just created an app with which you can transfer money without any transaction fees. Because what they pay a lot for are the transaction fees. I don't know, what is it, like up to 5%. And it's a lot of money if you're just, a Filipino worker trying to sustain your family, miles away. So I think, of course, we can talk about crypto and blockchain. And I do think blockchain, once it's fully developed and adopted, will be amazing. But it will be a few years still. So I think it's also important that we don't forget the simple solutions to make sure we take care of people already in the present.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you bring up this issue of education, because I think that's certainly something as you look at getting the unbanked banked is educating them, helping to build trust in financial institutions, which in many places there aren't. I was at a session yesterday where there was a really interesting conversation looking at how digital identity, right? So, you know, if we're several years away from maybe blockchain being the solution, but how can digital identity help people access finance across systems, particularly also for refugees where they might not have an identity tied to a country anymore? And so I guess one of the questions that I have for you also is, as we look at this emerging technology, how can we address some of these existing challenges? How do we make sure that things are sort of growing at the right speed, that they're inclusive and sustainable, that we're not sort of moving ahead on one hand and then leaving people behind as we're doing that?
Gosh, I feel if we had the answer to that, right, we could solve a lot of problems. I think it's quite difficult, and education really is important, especially because, and like you said, you mentioned trust, and most of the unbanked people are in the countries where there isn't much trust for the government, right? So the governments are usually corrupt and people are unbanked, you know, in those countries. So how do you actually instill the sense of trust in the people that they can actually trust this government or any new organization that comes in and tries to help? I also listened to a panel yesterday where somebody spoke about Africa and how many people come in and they actually really have good intentions, they want to help, but they don't understand that it's not just about coming to somebody and ask, what do you need, and give him money. It takes away the purpose of the person, and the person doesn't feel good about it because it's not just taking the money and that's it. You need to build trust first of all. You need to find something. How can they actually make money themselves by, you know, feeling the purpose, by feeding the family, by creating a more sustainable and longer future, and not just receiving a quick amount of cash. So I think education and trust are the main topics here.
I wonder how you think about that, because you're fundamentally trying to sort of build a whole new system that could, you know, give access to finance, access to a new type of identity for a lot of people. And I wonder how you go about that trust building as you're trying to embark on this sort of dramatic shift.
Actually, yes. Trust is certainly a perennial issue, especially for people alienated in their own countries and communities. And we actually have concrete steps for generating trust and, you know, identity, especially in digital space. We aim to basically give full sovereignty to Federation of Cyber States and East Cyber Nation. And the way to do it is, first of all, financing. Basically through the steps I described earlier. And after introducing a strong finance scheme, we basically work with other countries to basically get the cyber nation to be recognized, you know, as a sovereign state. After that, we will be able to issue passports to citizens of cyber nations by the e-government of the cyber nation. So this is a very new, novel approach to producing new identities, not beholden to traditional, identities such as ethnicities or nationality, because people are basically creating their own government in cyberspace, and they're basically receiving the kind of identity they choose for themselves through the e-government they have created. So this is basically a concept at this stage, but we are gathering, working with various partners to implement this idea.
Great. Karen, I want to bring you into our conversation. Maybe start just by telling us a little bit about how OECD is looking at the sort of changing nature of finance and how innovation is impacting finance, and how within that we can ensure that the unbanked are getting services, that technologies are sort of rolling out in a way that aren't leaving people behind.
Great. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Apologies, the shuttles from Twisters were stuck in traffic. Anyway, so the OECD has been doing a lot of work over the past years on finance, innovation, technology. In our Science Technology Innovation Directorate, They've been leading work on Global Digital, which is work cutting across OECD, linking work on innovation and technology across work that we're doing. In terms of finance in particular, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of ESG, sustainable finance, impact investing. We've seen a real change over the last couple of decades in terms of both company and investors' interest in going beyond shareholder value and really thinking about stakeholder value and going beyond mitigating risks to really trying to also have an impact, a positive impact. So we've seen that on the corporate side through adoption of our multinational enterprise guidelines that more and more companies are following. We're seeing it on the investment side through, of course, more and more companies not only sort of following and adopting ESG, but trying to go beyond that and thinking about investing for impact. We're seeing it through our work in development finance, blended finance and the adoption of our principles for blended finance. We're seeing it through our work on green finance as well, and through our work on SDG alignment. So we're really seeing this movement on all fronts, a movement towards caring more about impact and also being able to measure the kind of impact that you're having. We actually are part of a global consortium on impact measurement, working on developing a standardized framework for conceptual framework for impact measurement, and we hope to be able to deliver something for the G7 next year. In terms of then how that links back with technology, we're doing a lot of work on blockchain. Obviously technology can play a very important role in finance and also in impact measurement in terms of how you can use big data to give you better information, to better understand the impact that companies and investors are having. So I would really say on all fronts, for many years we've been heavily focused on technology and doing a lot of work on investment, but really this is sort of all coming together now under this impact umbrella and measurement and results, and how can we really make sure that we're making progress on the SDGs and beyond.
Great. One question I have for all of you is as technologies change that both shift the way finance and money moves and access to finance, what sort of governance is needed? I mean, you're talking about creating a whole sort of new infrastructure around, cyber nations, and, we're seeing technology really shift pretty considerably. And so do we need new or additional regulations? Will we need new global standards? And what do you think those might be?
Yeah, I think it's really important for governments to create the right ecosystems for the companies to thrive. Karen mentioned innovation. I think innovation is really key. If you don't innovate, you're really behind. And we have big examples of that. Nokia 10 years ago was the largest smartphone maker, and now they're almost vanished, right? So innovation is really key. But in order to create an ecosystem where innovation can thrive, where startups can thrive, because I don't want to say all, because big companies also bring in innovation, but most of innovation comes from startups, right? So you need to give them this ecosystem, and it's not just giving them funding. Funding is really important, so I speak from a VC perspective. Yes, it's important to give them funding, but it's equally important to create the right regulations, and that's where the government has to be on board. So we create sandboxes, for example. There's a sandbox in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, where fintech companies can build in a regulation that allows them to try out new things where you wouldn't be able to just do it elsewhere, normally. So to create those, regulations, also incentives. For example, it almost pains me as a German to say that Macron created an amazing ecosystem and incentives in France and attracted a lot of startups to come because he gave them easier visa access, access to, I think, office space, etc. So attract startups to come, and by attracting them to come, he creates the ecosystem, of course. So Perez is doing really well in terms of innovation. For that holistic ecosystem, I just want to add also, so it's investors, the money that flows in, the governments, but also the academia is super important because that's where the new innovation talent is being created, right, and born, and yeah, and it's important to educate. I go always back to the point of education. It's important to educate not just the people who receive, but also the people who give money. For example, investors has to be educated. Karen also mentioned impact investing. I think that's why I'm also working now on building an impact fund, because I think it's the right time. People have understood that impact investing is not just philanthropy, at least in the Middle East where I'm based. Many times people thought, oh, impact means I give my money and pretty much I say goodbye to this money and never see it again, which is not the case. Impact investing is you give money, but there is a return on investment as well. So you can, as a startup, do good and make money with it. As an investor, you give money and you have a return on investment. So there's a big shift, especially with family offices as well. The younger generation realizes that it's not just about the traditional investment of, into real estate. It's really, it makes a big difference if you invest into something that will potentially, help save the world and solve those SDGs that we all committed to solve by 2030. Yeah.
Can I build on that? I couldn't agree with you more. There are many elements that need to come together. It's not just financing, it's not just innovation, it's not just policy. And actually in our last report on impact investing that came out last year, well, actually it was called the Impact Imperative for Sustainable Development. This is just the highlights. The whole report is too heavy to carry around. But anyway, the main points in there were really four, and it echoes what you said. One is about money, and everyone's talking about the billions to trillions, but it's not about the money, it's about where the money's going. And the money's not going to the right places. It's going to the usual suspects. It's going to where it was going before with the little window dressing on top. So if we're serious about the SDGs, we have to make sure that money's going where it's most needed. Then we have to make sure there's really innovation, that it's not just funding the same old things, but that we have these entrepreneurs that are coming up with more effective, more efficient solutions to these issues, because we're never going to solve the SDGs by doing things the way we're doing them. We know that doesn't work. And then finally, two other points. We need then the data to really understand what's really happening and what the results are that I referred to earlier. But then we also need the policy. As you said, there have to be incentives in the market, and sometimes you need carrots and sometimes you need sticks. And policymakers can provide a bit of both. They can help facilitate the enabling environment, but they can also regulate, which can also change incentives and change behavior. So I think the combination of all four of those elements is really, really important.
I guess one follow-up question on that is, obviously OECD has a pretty interesting ability to influence how governments look at some of those policy or governance issues. And I think as we look at some of the emerging technology, it can be a very powerful tool, but it could also have downsides. It could be implemented in ways that aren't inclusive. And so I wonder how you look at your role in sort of helping create that guidelines to ensure that finance moving forward is sustainable, is equitable.
Yeah, so we use soft law in many ways, and we do that through establishing principles that then get adopted. I'll take an example in AI. We developed principles around artificial intelligence last year, much needed because that's an area where technology can be applied in the wrong ways. And these principles were adopted not only by the EU but also at the G20. And that then puts power behind it, and more countries are looking at that. So you go from principles and then you develop guidelines, and then this can lead to legislation in different countries. So we do recognize that we have a very important role to play. We take that very seriously. And in all of the areas of technology and finance where we're working, that's really our goal. First of all, to collect the data and have the evidence and really understand the market. Secondly, to understand what the role of policymakers could and should be. And then third, what kind of tools and instruments are needed from the softer to the harder, and how can we help set the path for that?
And I'm curious to hear your perspectives on how you think about governance within cyber nations and ensuring that that's built in a way that doesn't end up being exploitative, and how that might both fit into sort of, existing governance, global governance standards, or whether it would sit outside of that.
That's a very important question. So the exact form of governance of cyber nations will be open to future possibilities, because it's only an emerging concept right now. However, we don't want bad guys like terrorists and criminal organizations to exploit this concept. Theoretically, they could potentially form their own sovereign, cyber nations. However, we basically go through the normal process of recognizing states, such as you need two or more states to recognize you, right, as a sovereign state. And then ultimately we envision cyber nations to become members of United Nations. So, of course, our governance will adhere to international law and UN standards. And one principle I would like to emphasize is that the core principle of Federation of Cyber States idea is that sovereignty without land or territory. This is very important. We want to empower, diasporas and stateless people who are disenfranchised and alienated all around the world. So, territory has been a traditional source of conflict and war, and we want to eliminate this root cause of war with the power of blockchain. So sovereignty without land, this is a very important principle of our idea for Federation of Cyber States. And so our governance, of course, will definitely revolve around this principle, sovereignty without land. Thank you.
Great. I think that we'll sort of go to some final forward-looking thoughts from each of you, and I think I'll ask sort of in two parts. Both, where do you think we should be by 2030? And what would you most like to see change by the time we get there? You want to kick us off?
Oh, two really big questions. Well, having built several accelerators and really dealing a lot with startups, I do hope we can educate people much more on the impact investing side and really give money to startups that are trying to create change and make a difference in the world. Having said that, also, I do think there's almost more funding available than actually really great ideas. So that's also a bit of an issue. So we need to almost find this balance of, for money, like Karen was saying, going to the right places, but also supporting the startups that are actually really building those life-changing things. I have ideas that will then become projects and will become reality. We'll only have 10 years left, for 2030. So I really think, we've been speaking a lot. I feel it's time to start doing, and it's difficult to solve all the 17 challenges. So in my case, I plan to pick a couple that are relevant for the Middle East and really focus on that. It will be definitely the education, health, innovation in general. So yeah, my hopefully vision is to have more money going into impact investing, but going to the right places from people who really understand, who have been educated on what investing actually means, and to manage the expectations, because the return on investment can take a few years. A unicorn is not born overnight. So yeah, I do hope that more corporates commit to it as well. I hope the corporates will understand that they will be disrupted if they don't. When I was in Brussels, there was a saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. Like, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. So I feel like those big corporates have to understand that. And I work with many, and they do understand they have to innovate, or they try to do it in-house themselves. But I think it's really key to work with the right startups, to give them money, to give them the platform to to test their products as well, because that's also important. You need to have a platform, a government that allows you either in a sandbox or like Dubai has done, for example, they almost created a lab for testing and invited startups to test the products on the ground in Dubai. So just have governments who are more willing to change regulations if needed, to help the startups and investors put money in the right places, and hopefully we can solve some of those SDGs by 2030. So that's hopefully my optimistic vision that will become reality.
Well, by 2030, we'd like everyone from the diasporas all around the world and people who agree to the principle of sovereignty without land or territory will join cyber nations and form Federation of Cyber States. And we'd like to really reduce, if not eliminate, global inequality through the power of blockchain. We want to empower people all around the world who are suffering from lack of opportunities or even flat denial of their rights to gain access to a much different world, enabled by cyber technology and blockchain technology. So this is basically the vision we have. We'd like to eliminate global inequality in all forms with the power of blockchain. Thank you.
So my vision would be that in 2030, that we're not just talking about risk and return, but that we're talking about, not just talking about, but acting on risk, return, and impact. And that we'll be able to measure impact sufficiently that investors and companies can think about the trade-off between the three, well, trade-off's the wrong word, but can think about the relationship between the three and figure out where they want to be on the capital spectrum, and that we won't have these separate fiefdoms. The impact investors over here, the green investors over there, the social entrepreneurs over there. It's one market. It's just people at different parts of the spectrum of capital and the priority of finance and impact. But if we can actually measure impact, then we don't need these different categories, because then people can better understand and make more fluid choices. I also would just support what was said earlier. We really need action. I think the last 5 years we've had a lot of talk, a lot of commitment, well, a lot of aligning to the SDGs. But aligning to the SDGs isn't enough. Having the colorful boxes on the annual report, we really do need action. We're seeing action through different groups at the OECD. We launched at the G7 in Biarritz the Business for Inclusive Growth initiative. There are 36 companies that are signed up, 2 foundation partners, other companies that want to join. I know that the forum also has stakeholders, members that are galvanizing corporates and investors. So it's great to see all this movement, but we need to make sure that this really translates into concrete actions and that we really get to an impact economy by 2030.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think that's a great note to end on. I do think that we are facing a sort of critical moment in this year, and in all the conversations I'm having, and certainly with people here and in my coverage of the SDGs, I think this is sort of a turning point moment, and if there isn't sort of this shift to action, it'll be very hard to get to the goals. So thank you all very much for being here, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Taking a break, we just want to continue. Okay. All right, thank you again to panelists. And I would now like to introduce our third of 4 panels for this morning. And this panel is on the topic of the United Nations SDGs, opening new paths to sustainability. So just as a reminder for those, the SDGs are all about ensuring that economic growth fuels well-being for all and creates smarter and healthier environments. It is a road that maps all stakeholders from the public and private sectors are implementing and designing products and strategies to make sure that the global citizens' aspiration for conscious capitalism and sustainability and a more inclusive world come to fruition. So here to discuss the SDGs, I'd like to introduce our panelists and moderator. Mr. Jérôme Perez, Global Head of Sustainability at Nespresso. Mr. Vincent Subila, give them a hand, Director General, Geneva Chamber of Commerce and Geneva Member of Parliament. We're Anna Kleistelou, Head of Social Sustainability and Human Rights at Philip Morris International. And welcoming back, Mr. Jonathan Parienti, Chairman of SIGEF Davos, founder of Horyu, the social network for social good. And finally, Maxim Pasik, the Executive Chairman of Watergen. And we have a new moderator, Hadas Gold. She's a reporter with CNN. So please welcome our next panel.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Very pleased to be here with such a wonderful panel in the middle of Davos, literally and figuratively middle of the week and middle center of town. So the United Nations SDGs, when I was reading through them, I found them to be pretty much covering everything you could possibly think of for good reason. But also I found them to be very ambitious. And so to start off, I would like all of our panelists to very quickly introduce yourselves. Perhaps, for example, if the audience might know what Watergen is, we can explain what that is. But then also tell me, why should we even create such goals? What's the point of having all of these long lists of such ambitious goals? So Maxim, would you like to start?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So my name is Maxim Pasik. I'm the chairman of Watergen. We are an Israeli company that has disruptive technologies that creating clean drinking water from the air in the great efficiency. For your question, I think it's very, very important to establish those goals, because if we don't put for us a target like a society for the future, so we will never achieve anything. So it's very important, and the goals are really very ambitious, but part of the goals we can achieve, and we will speak later on. At least I had the discussion in the Wall Street Journal CEO Council, and I was asked the same question, so what did you do year before? So we achieved a lot of goals that we put in order to achieve the goal number 6 of the UN. So we can do it. It's very important to achieve the goals and to do it after.
Hello, good morning. So I'm Anna Kletsido, and I'm working for Philip Morris International. On your question about sustainable development goals and the 2030 agenda on sustainable development, they speak about transformational change, systemic change, and they have become like the North Star for all stakeholders in society. And of course, it is somehow like a roadmap of what the world needs to improve to become a better place. So every single company needs to rethink the way we operate, the way we function, in order that the SDGs to be achieved on time.
Vincent?
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me here, almost as a neighbor, coming from Geneva on the other side of Switzerland, and heading the Geneva Chamber of Commerce among other assignments. Coming from I guess I'm a pure Geneva product, being both a qualified lawyer and also coming from the finance background, but always with a very vested and keen interest on business for purpose. And as you rightly mentioned, actually the SDGs are a plan of actions that are carefully crafted and articulated for companies to stride towards a better tomorrow. But this sounds to be highly rhetoric, but the implementation of the SDGs is also a very powerful leverage in terms of value creation for our companies. What matters to us most from the private sector and how we can foster win-win scenario is precisely Article 17, I'm sure we're going to come back to this, on public-private partnership. And this is, of course, of relevance for a Chamber of Commerce because we act as a facilitator between public dimension and the private angle, but also for Geneva, which is home to the SDGs. So I'm delighted to discuss this further. Thank you.
Hello. Hello again. So I'm Jérôme Perez. I've been working, in fact, for Nestlé for more than 22 years now. I spent almost 12 years previously in finance in the water industry, and now I've been working for Nespresso and heading the sustainability strategy and team for now 12 years. The answer, I think, came from the other people, why the SDGs are important. It's, of course, important to have a framework and to understand collectively what we want to achieve. Now, perhaps what I would add is I see after few years trying to learn how we can contribute and how we can measure impact through the SDG. Two challenges. One is how you understand the contribution and how you measure your contribution to something which is really global, specifically when you are a private organization, and this is not simple. You understand that when you are doing something, investing, for example, on water project, that you are contributing to the water SDG, but how you measure the size of your impact and how you are contributing to the global goal, this is more difficult. And the second one is probably related to the governance. We see that there is a real need for acceleration, and there is a fundamental question is why it's not happening. And probably in terms of governance, we need to understand and to give, I don't know, probably to the United Nations, the potential to drive the acceleration and to drive the change. And this, for the moment, probably is not happening at the speed that we are expecting.
Yes, Jonathan Varianti. So I'm the founder of OU, the Social Network for Social Good. We started that journey in 2012, and as you know, the SDGs have been signed in 2015. Before the SDGs, there were the Millennium Development Goals. So the principle of having people connecting and trying to build a more safer impact for the world is not, just from now. This is something that has happened across time and history. The only difference is now we are facing challenges which are becoming systemic challenges, and we are seeing the aftermath of those challenges in our daily lives. So when we started OU, it was really with the ideal of connecting people from around the planet for meaningful interactions and meaningful purpose. And since we started, I only see more and more people and energy joining that trajectory of being more conscious, aware, and willing. And so I think that the chance we have with the SDGs is, number one, to have governments that have signed, approved, and now that are seeing that the momentum, the energy, the people, the citizens are actually interested about that. And we have to salute, the Paris Agreement on the climate, which were really a trigger, because the COP21 was preceded by 20 other COPs. And from the COP21, it was really a momentum that was, really building up. And so we have to see that as a chance. We have to understand that this is our chance, not only the chance to validate a number, but this is a chance to let a legacy for the world. And the last comment will be the 17th SDG, which is the partnership for the goals. nothing will be achieved if there is no partnership. And this conference today is about that, and this panel where we see people that are innovators, entrepreneurs, people from established companies, people from the public sector, and people from the media working together for making awareness a reality in people's life. That's our chance for tomorrow.
So that feeds in very well to my next question, which is, it's very wonderful to have these goals, and this will be for anybody who wishes to contribute. And we have people from the government side, we have people from the private side, we have people from the NGO side. How do you take the step from putting out these ambitious lists and making people actually make the change? How do you force companies? How do you force governments? Do you need governments to set forth new laws? Is it something that comes from the bottom up, from the people? I'd love to hear both from Anna and Jérôme talk about what makes, for example, a private company change their ways.
Maybe I can start. Let me start by saying that at PMI, the very heart of our sustainability strategy is about creating a smoke-free future, which is one without cigarettes. Because our key sustainability challenge is the impact of the product we sell, and this is what we had as a first step to address if we wanted to have any kind of legitimacy talking about sustainability and our contribution to the SDGs. And this is what we are doing. We are addressing now with the introduction of smoke-free products that are a better alternative for smokers. So by having said that, which is, as Charles mentioned, our biggest contributions to SDGs, we have other social and environmental issues that we need to address. And this is where your question comes in, how the government can support, or how we multiply the leverage what we are doing. So regarding our smoke-free vision, certainly government, NGOs, academia could support. More and more public health experts saying that it is not public policy should not only talking about discouraging initiation of smoking or discouraging cessation, that there are other intermediaries ways they can support in leveraging the potential of smokers to switch to better alternatives. I believe this is the greater contribution that other stakeholders could do to support us in our vision.
Quick follow-up for you. It's very interesting, Philip Morris, there's two goals here, for example, the good health and well-being and sustainable cities and communities. So I understand going towards a smoke-free future, so why not just stop selling cigarettes?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. We have this question all the time. I mean, our objective is to phase out cigarettes completely.
By when? Sorry, by when?
This cannot happen from one day to another. And if Philip Morris stops selling cigarettes today, nothing will change. Nothing will change in terms of the public health. So what we are doing is we are transforming our company, we are transforming our factories, we are transforming our entire value chain in order to develop and commercialize better choices for the 1.1 billion women and men that will continue to smoke. So this will happen. This is our objective. This is our vision. All PMI is behind this, but we need the support. With the support that I just mentioned, this cannot be accelerated. So we can reach our objective faster if we have the support of other stakeholders, governments, NGOs, public health experts.
Maxime, for you, you're from the NGO side of this, so how do you find is the best way to make actual action happen? Do you think it's all based off of government setting laws and new rules, or is it the more organic way, the more efficient way to make things happen?
First of all, in our case, it's much more complicated to go with the governments because, first of all, we are disruptive technology. It's new. So people need to understand what is it. Before 2 years I was on the border to London, and they asked him, what are you coming here? I'm coming to the meeting. What are you doing? Water from there. He saw that I'm crazy. So the same is from the government, so it's taking time that they will understand what is it. But meantime, we need to do things, and we feel the social responsibility and also sustainable goals that we need to fulfill in order to provide to the people water. So we need to teach the market, we need to teach the government that this is the solution in maybe 70% of the world. So actually what we are doing, I was asked the same question yesterday in the CEO Council, and I told, listen, in 1 year we supplied machines to more than 30 countries. We gave a lot of safe drinking water to a lot of kids, to a lot of hospitals. Part of the project with charity project, part of the project with government participation. So we are working, we bring the machines to the people, we try to do it affordable for everyone, and this is the mission of Mr. Mirilashvili, that is the main shareholder of the company, is to bring this technology to each and every person in the planet. I was sitting in this water session yesterday, and they were speaking regarding, for example, in Beijing, the person that wrote all the water strategy of China. So he told that they're taking the water to Beijing from 1,200 kilometers. So what for? And they need to bring it to the standards of the drinking water. We can put our machines totally decentralized as a system, and you can have your water without plastic, without anything, save water, without problem in pipes at your home. And you can bring the water from the aquifers, so through the pipes, it is not at such high quality, because anyway, because of pipes, it's going with the bad quality. The same story, for example, in United States, they have very bad quality of the water because of the pipes, and it's not possible to clean it. So in our solution, no plastic, no logistic, no nothing. So we make a lot of steps. We make a lot of charity, a lot of, we are trying to push this project much faster, and it's moving great. And now we put it even in the cars, so the people know that they can, in future, will sit in the car, you can sit in your car, push the button, you can drink the water. And it's working. In a couple of years, we will have the first cars with the water from Watergen. So we try to do something in order to achieve the goals. And now you can see, by the way, our water that's coming from the air. Yeah?
Vincent, you wanted to follow up on that?
No, I must compliment on the very fresh water, not coming from the Swiss Alps, but from the air. So thank you for bringing some bottles with you, with the conveniency that you don't need to fetch them very far. No, I just wanted to, echoing on what we mentioned about Objective 17 and partnership between the private sector and government, indeed having a double hat myself, because the Chamber of Commerce, at least in Switzerland, are private institutions, so we can constructively criticize the government. I think that lobbying activity, advocating the voice of the business is key, but also have the political hat, being an elected member of parliament. And therefore I see the necessity to again achieve a balanced approach whereby we combine both assets. You know the old say which claims that together you alone you'll go fast, but together you'll go far. And I strongly believe that, for instance, and I can only comment on the Swiss example, that in Switzerland we've managed to craft quite a unique balance in terms of partnership between the private sector and the government, whereby the government is perceived precisely as a trusted partner, as an enabler, and that's where chambers as facilitator can also act if need be, but really to work hand in hand. Let me give you a very clear example. Geneva is, for instance, positioning itself as not only the birthplace of wealth management, but also as a pioneer in sustainable finance, which is delivering through measurable, scalable, smart added value to the benefit of all, and generating jobs, which at the end of the day is a KPI for us. And the result that we've achieved here was only made possible through a smart, again, and sharp, I should say, combination of the private sectors and the government. And the government should act as it does, with both the carrot on one hand, with incentives to make sure, and we've adopted at the Swiss level what we call a license light that allows certain types of financial actors to obtain a permission to deliver the services in a faster track way, if you wish. So that's the incentive part, but also we want to make sure that our financial sector, of course, act in a fully compliant manner, and that's where the stick possibly can come. But again, let's bear in mind that the public sector is there to serve the private economic interest, and it's in the interest of the private sector to cooperate with the public sector, and I think this is how we can achieve the SDGs in a positive manner. Thank you.
Jérôme, I'm really interested to hear about Nespresso's point on this. So many people love Nespresso and use the pods, and I know you have a recycling program. How successful is it, and how much can you rely on a private citizen to interact with and complete this recyclable process for Nespresso?
Can you, sorry, I didn't get the question.
Sure. How much can you rely, and have you found it successful that the private consumer is completing the recycling program for Nespresso? Because there is a worry that when you have to rely on a person to take the pod, put it in the bag, send it in, that they won't actually complete the process.
I think, thank you for this question, because I think it's a fundamental question even beyond Nespresso. We know that in this 21st century, circularity will be the main objective that we have to tackle together. And most of the challenges that we are facing with, including climate, etc., find a solution into a more circular economy. So the problem of recycling, the behavior of all of us, the private sector, in the way we design the product, the behavior of the consumers, in the willingness to participate to this journey. And it's a good example that it's together that we can reach, let's say, the ambition that we have for a more sustainable world. So Nespresso, because of the system, is confronted exactly to this kind of situation. We started more than 25 years ago, starting by Switzerland, a country where sustainability is already strongly embedded in the behavior of the people and the citizens, to recycle and to bring recycling capacity to people. Today, we have more than 95% recycling capacity available for our consumers. In many countries, we have services like the recycling at home. So what the recycling at home is about, for people who don't know, is that you can use your mailbox and the postman is going to recollect the used capsule, and everything will be recycled, not only the aluminium, but also the coffee ground to produce energy and heat. And we see that even with this, what I would define as amazing opportunities to participate, we see that we are not reaching 100%. So, and this is not about saying, okay, now it's not our responsibility as an organization because we did the job and our consumers have to do the job. I think it's also part of our responsibility to understand what it means. And beyond Nespresso, for all of us, is just because we are not good at recycling. We are not good at that. And this is why frameworks like the SDG are critical, and the way we are going to communicate on it, to really communicate on the objectives we have, on the progress we are making to make it engaging for people, so that they understand that we are reaching something by doing this, is essential.
So then, for Nespresso, then, why not change the product? If you're not having 100% recycling, why not make it just stop selling, for example, the pods and make a permanent, sort of a permanent pod that you just refill or something like that?
Yeah, so because like always, the devil is in the detail, and often there is a misperception of what, in a certain way, the environmental impact is. And in reality, it's not because you have a packaging that your environmental footprint is worse. And in reality, portion coffee has the strong advantage, environmentally speaking. I'm even not speaking about the quality of the product, that you are using just the coffee that you need, just the water that you need. And when we speak about the coffee, for example, if you take a portion coffee system compared with a full automat, you are using half of the coffee to have an even better quality. And half of the coffee in your coffee mean half of the land to produce the coffee. And most of the environmental impact for a coffee is on agriculture. It's not on the packaging, which on top of this is recyclable, because aluminum is 100% recyclable. And so something that could be perceived as a very simple solution, we stop because there is a packaging. In reality, you are losing the quality of your product and you will have a better environmental impact. And so this is where, again, education and explaining to people is essential, so that we are not taking wrong decision because of the wrong information that we have in our hand. So I hope I answered the question.
I wanted to ask, we see some people, and we have also here in the SDGs, conscious capitalism. Jonathan, is that realistic? Can that actually exist together, being capitalist and being conscious about it at the same time?
Well, that I think is the question really that is at the essence of the equation for humanity. Because capitalism is now what is the driver of the world economy. And the world economy is affecting all of us because we are part of it, in our way to consume, in our way to have ambition, in our way to project ourselves, in our way to build our education. So capitalism system is the system we have at the moment. Now we know as well, with the financial crisis, with all what has happened over the last 20 years, just to name those 20 years, we know that this system have absolutely to improve, to evolve. And this is where we have to go in a dimension of consciousness, and that's where capitalism system and awareness or consciousness can be, like a bridge. It's a little bit oxymoric most of the time, but actually this is probably the only way for us as humanity to make, like the jump for the generations to come. So the question is, how can we build on conscious capitalism? And that's where I believe that this starts by little steps. This starts in our day-to-day. And that's why to have a place where anyone in the world can share a positive statement, a positive news, a positive action, can learn from each other, can connect for meaningful interaction, leveraging social media, not for egoism or egocentric or sensationalism, but using and leveraging social networks to learn from each other and to build a momentum for change. This, I think, is the first step. But this is not enough. That's why when I quit finance and put myself at the service of this cause, I had, a visual which was, like multidimensional. You have to make, like the work on the connectivity for good, but then you have to bring a dimension of impact. That's why what I did is I created a digital currency for inclusion. How does it work? It's quite simple. You make a transaction, and then you have a very small percentage that is added to the transactions, and that percentage will go and be distributed through a voting system to the people that are part of our social network based on the SDGs they are actively supportive of. And this is, like with the voting system, which we call lights, so we don't honor you, we give lights, by the community. So this way, we are capable not only to facilitate meaningful transactions, but on every transaction, any potential transactions, we can make a circular aspect of impact, which will be channeled to the people around the planet, wherever they are, that are making the change happen based on their actions on the ground, with their communities, and through people being aware of what they do and saying, yes, this speaks to us, so I like these people. I like their actions. So this is a in a nutshell, it's very little. But this is like potentially the way. Imagine if tomorrow, instead of having just the VAT, you had a VAT, a social VAT, which I call proof of impact with our digital currency. And that social VAT, we find a way, leveraging, for instance, blockchain technology, which we have with our technology, to distribute it to the change makers around the planet. Those people, they have the project, they have the courage to create new projects. And we know that to be an entrepreneur is not the easy way, is a hard way. But they want to solve some local challenges with their ideas, with their cultures, with their diversities. And if we can empower them in a trustable way, they will find the solutions. So for me, the SDGs is just like the beginning. It's the beginning to understand that the change is in our hand, and this is about how humanity will be confronted to those challenges, being able to show creativity and empathy. If we have those two pillars, we will understand that we have to find a solution altogether, and that wherever we are, we can tend a hand, a supportive hand to others that will be, like making a huge change for the world, that will be a change for positive change and positive impact.
So we only have a few minutes left, 4 minutes left. So to end here, I would like all of us to go down the line and tell me, in the past year, who or what company has impressed you the most that has touched upon one of these SDGs? So it can't be your own company, can't be your own self. It could be any company, any single person that you think has made an important impact or has made a great, at least even a step forward to make the world a better place. So sorry to put you on the spot first, Maxim. Okay, anybody want to start?
I can
Jérôme,
start.
sure, go first.
Yeah, no, I can start. I think for me it's difficult to have this kind of topic without mentioning what is happening with Greta Thunberg today. The way that and it's beyond Greta, is the way that the young generation now is mobilizing behind the topic of sustainability and saying we want a future, and we have all to contribute and to find solution and to change now. So I think for me, if there is something which is remarkable in this moment, is how the young generation now is taking leadership on this topic and really calling us to change.
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree about that. I just wanted to say that the SDGs covers such a big scope, and they are talking about such a social and economic transformation that is needed in order to achieve it, that no one sector, be it government, public society, or companies or academia, can solve it by itself. So we need to listen to the next generation. It's clearly time to react. It's time to change, to think things differently. So I think that's the most important message, and it's all about dialogue and at the end inclusion, so nobody is left behind.
Well, of course, I think there's a major change of paradigm. We're all witnessing it, and the public outcry for a more sustainable world, experiencing the fact that there is no plan or a planet B, as we say, is definitely a voice that we need to hear. But behind this, I'd like to pay tribute to all the entrepreneurs, and I'm sure the numbers of them, at least all of them on stage and within this room, that on a daily basis and sometimes very humbly, modestly, and outside the public light, strive to ensure that we foster a better tomorrow by innovation. Because at the end of the day, I believe that innovation, and this is something that has been widely debated here, is a key leverage towards a more inclusive and sustainable world. And the answer, again, lies in the hands of business actors in partnership, as you've understood from what I previously stated, in partnership with government. So I believe that instead of taking a very divisive view whereby we're supposed to reconcile Wall Street and Main Street, we should try to foster that dialogue and literacy, business literacy, pedagogy towards the people to understand what the business is achieving with a clear, ambitious goal in terms of SDGs is key, and this is what we humbly try and do at the Chamber.
I would say, a few things on that. Number one is, I think, when we say women empowerment, we understand now this is going, to be a reality and more. And so we see in the world that women, and we will have a panel just after that on that subject, but women are becoming more and more entrepreneurs. And I think with their sensitivity, with their understanding, with the life they carry in their being, I think that's really what inspires me. I want to see more women being, like entrepreneurs and inspiring us by their action. The second thing I want to say is, I think to make the change happen, we have to have the chance to have at top management level in Forbes 500 companies, people that are courageous and humble enough to be able to say, we need to change our model. We need to adjust our model. And in that regards, having been able, to interact with them closely, I must say that Philip Morris has inspired me with their team in that aspect. Because to think, like a new model and saying, okay, you know what we do is not sustainable, and to be able, to change that and say, we're going to do it without smoking. Think about that, 10 years ago. This is just absolutely not to be expected. And I think that most of those major companies, they all have, and we all have, things to change and things to address. And we have to understand that companies are entities, but the entities is what? It's people. And those people, they want to be proud. They want to know that what they do day to day is meaningful. So my trust goes to all of them, to all of us. And to say that wherever we are, we can make a difference. We can understand that whatever is the size of the mountain to climb to make the change, if we do it humbly and understanding that this starts now, then I think we will be surprised that at the end of the day we will have new generation not looking at us and blaming us, but we will have new generation that will embrace the legacy we will have legate to them and say, we will be capable to carry it forward.
Well, we are over time right now, so thank you all very much, and hope you stick around for the next panel.
Well, thank you to all our panelists. We've covered a lot this morning, but we have one final panel to go, and the topic for this is female empowerment, a new hope for a better world. So what does that mean? Women currently play a key role in all economic, social, and political arenas. Making progress on gender equality and empowerment has been made in several regions of the world. However, true development that is sustainable can only be achieved through a more gender equitable distribution of resources and power. Strengthening women's ability to take control over their lives results in a stronger society in its entirety. So with that as the context, I'd like to welcome up our next and final panelists. They are Ms. Anne Cairns, Executive Vice Chairman of Mastercard. We have, welcoming back, Charles Bendotti, Senior Vice President of People and Culture at Philip Morris International, Katja Iversen, President and CEO of Women Deliver, and Christy Tanner, Executive Vice President and General Manager of CBS News Digital, and welcoming back, Haddis Gold as moderator with CNN.
I think we are just missing Anne. Perfect timing, Anne. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for the final panel of the day. This one is a very good one, I think. Women Empowerment, A New Hope for a Better World. But the data is clear. The equal world is a better world for all of us. And the world is a better place for everyone when there is a gender equality and racial equality. But today's approaches to gender equality we're seeing are still largely ineffective. The last World Economic Forum gender gap estimates a staggering 257 years to close the gap on economic participation in women. And we saw a study just at the beginning of this week that showed something like 20 or 30 of the richest men in the world have more wealth than I think nearly all the women in Africa or something like that, which is just an incredible statistic. So we have a wonderful panel here, and I will first start to let them each introduce themselves and tell us maybe a specific stat about women empowerment and gender equality that strikes them recently. So Anne, if you'd like to start.
Sure, my name's Anne Cairns. I'm the Vice Chair of Mastercard. I'm also the Global Chair of the 30% Club around the world. And a good stat that I can share is the 30% Club was formed in 2011 without quotas to try and change the number of women on boards in Britain. And as of September, we hit 30% of women on boards in the FTSE 350, which is the top companies, PLCs in Britain. Of course, people say to me, well, is that your aspiration? And I say, certainly not. That is actually a flaw, not a cap. It just means that those boards that have that can go on to create gender equality.
Katja.
My name is Katja Iversen, and I'm the President and CEO of Women Deliver. We're an advocacy organization, and we work to drive investments in girls and women and gender equality, whether political or financial. And I'd say the stat I want to share is that if we had gender equality in the workplace, we could add 28 trillion, that's 26% to global GDP. That's the combined size of the US and Japan's economy. So it's not pocket change.
I'm Christy Tanner. I'm the Executive Vice President and General Manager of CBS News Digital. I run our 24/7 live free global streaming news channel. And a stat I'd like to share is that we've committed to having 50% of the people that we put on camera as reporters, correspondents, and anchors be female by the end of this year. By the way, it's already achieved.
Impressive. First, thank you for having me. It's very good to be a minority time to time for male.
Yeah.
You know, and I wish more male will be in that position to better understand.
Now I know how we often feel.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm the head of what we call People and Culture at PMI, which is HR in other companies. I'm also the head of the transformation, how we morph our organization to sell our new products. And I'm also the head of inclusion and diversity. And we can come back to that. It's not called diversity and inclusion, but inclusion and diversity. We may cover that later on. Something that we did at PMI and that we got last year, it took us 2 years to get there. We are the first multinational worldwide to be certified equal salary. So every single affiliate across the world working for PMI, 80,000 people, we guarantee that for the same job, people are paid exactly the same. And we were the first one to get that in the world. So we're pretty proud of it, but more important, what we try to achieve is to create a movement. It's not only for PMI. If we can have more companies joining us in that approach, maybe it won't take 20, 30 years to have equal salary. We did it in 2 years' time. I think the world can do it in 2 years' time.
So one thing I want to start with is, what policies have you all found, this is for anybody who wants to jump in, actually work to reach gender equality? Does it take quotas? Does it take, is it hiring people? Is it, what have you found actually creates change, that year over year you see the numbers changing?
Oh, well, first of all, I think, very simply, you have to measure it. When I joined Mastercard 8 years ago, I discovered that I only had a handful of women running countries. And I thought, this is such a pivotal P&L role. I would like more women in these roles. And so I traveled around the world as the head of international. I ran over 200 countries, and I said this to all of my managers around the world. And for 2 years, nothing happened. And I thought, obviously, I'm a super effective executive. And then I talked to my head of personnel and said to her, what are we going to do? And she said, let's do this. Every time there's a country manager role, ask to see the slate of candidates. Ask the hiring manager to justify why they're choosing the person that they want for the role. Don't tell them what to do, just let them know that you're looking at it. Within the first year, there was 10% more. Now we're at 50% from, less than 10%. And so it was just a question of being a senior executive in a company and actually looking at something and asking the question. That change behavior. I think you can change behavior that way culturally.
Yeah, Christy, I'm super interested in this because we see this a lot in media where often the first person you go to is the first person that pops in your mind you've talked to before, and often it's a white male. So how have you instituted that with your bookers, with your reporters, on how to, we work in such a fast environment, but you also don't just want to go to somebody just because they're a woman or just because they're a minority?
Right. Well, CBSN has an advantage in that we launched it 5 years ago. So it really was launched with the idea of reflecting the audience that we seek. It can be, in many cases, a cord-cutting audience, people who have never watched cable or broadcast news. There are people who are streaming on their connected TVs, on their mobile phones. So there was a goal from the outset to book the audience that we are attracting, and that has played out. We have a young, urban, diverse audience. Our median age is 37. By comparison, broadcasting cable can be 20 to 30 years older as a median age. But I think from my perspective, what really has made the difference is leadership, and not only saying the right things, but doing the right things. So walking the walk is really important. And in the news industry, I would say that we obviously have a lot of women and diverse people on camera, but those making the decisions are not the most diverse group of people. So I, as both the business and editorial leader of CBSN and CBS News Digital, really feel an obligation to maybe move a little faster and a little harder towards some of these inclusion goals that we have.
Katja, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have, so I'm in an NGO, but I have the joy of being an advisor to several of the Fortune 500s and to governments. And so 2 years ago, I was on Prime Minister Trudeau's G7 Council and met with the heads of states. And what we had prepared was, a report on the world women want and how to make gender equality history. And there we really kind of honed in on and then we continued it with Macron last year, where we did all the laws that needs to be in place to really further this. And we honed in on both the system change, but also the norm change. And if we look at systems, yes, we need the child-friendly policy or family-friendly policies with parental leave, including paternity leave. We need the anti-harassment, anti-sexual harassment, anti-harassment. Yes, we need that in place. Yes, we need the equal pay or equal income. We need the leadership. We need the on-stereotyping and the marketing. So we need all these elements because it's all things that push. But we also need that individual and the norm change. So thanks a lot, Anne, for just showing what does it mean when you put the lens to it. What does it mean when the boss is watching? Because, we do go in for quota. I've had many conversations with Christine Lagarde and some of the women who's been in the business, but have seen what it means. So quotas can be good, but they can't stand alone. It's also the norm change. It's also the biases. So it's both calling men out, but it's also calling them in, and putting that both system, individual, and norm focus on it.
Charles, I wanted to ask you, so I'm right at the age where a lot of my coworkers or colleagues who are my age who are women are at the point of the maternity leave debate, where they're having children and they're afraid of it affecting their careers and afraid of going on maternity leave, that they'll, take a step backwards. So we've talked a lot about how, in this conversation, how maternity leave can affect it, and you mentioned paternity leave. So I'm wondering, do you think that actually maybe not a forced paternity leave, but just offering an automatic paternity leave as an HR executive would help equalize kind of the stigma that children cause you to slow down your career? And is it realistic that companies would be at some point offering equal paternity leave? Do you think we could ever actually reach that?
I think there is no choice about it, just a question of time. I have 3 kids, and I couldn't enjoy the first weeks as much as I wanted to enjoy that. It was 20 years ago now. And if you want to attract and retain the best talent, we will have to provide this to everybody. I mean, I think, it's male, it's female. I think everybody has the right of taking care of their kids and enjoying that. So it's just a question of time. So yes, I'm all in for that.
Do you guys offer paternity leave?
We are in the process of thinking about it, how to do it. We have it in some market. It's still not institutionalized globally as I would like that to be. But yes, we have it in many, many markets. Absolutely.
So at Mastercard, we've historically offered 4 months full pay for women, 2 months full pay for men. Obviously applies to same-sex couples as well. And 80% of our men have taken their paternity leave.
The full 2 months.
The full 2 months. And not only that, but this year I'm pretty excited because we're going to roll out 4 months for men. So it's going to be completely gender neutral parental leave in over 200 countries in the world, because we just think it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And I'd say the data backs that. So both on maternity and paternity leave, it's not a belief, it's a fact. So what we have done with Unilever and Promundo, and now Twitter and Bank of America and a handful of other great companies, is to establish a task force for corporate paternity leave that really pushes it. So push it in an advocacy way to change the legal, but also push companies. So, don't just be in the process of thinking about it. It's about the doing.
I heard, I think it was this week, that the first Japanese male MP or something took paternity leave. Everybody's shocked.
And it's 2 weeks over a matter of 6 months. So, but we start somewhere.
It's a start.
Is the movement for women empowerment too white? How do we make sure that it's racially diverse? Because obviously all women are not just white.
Well, we're in Davos, okay? So, yes, this is fairly non-diverse. But if we go into the discussions that I'm often in, I have a funny role because I'm both in the real feminist, down to doing it movement, but then I'm also here, and I'm in the health space, and I'm with the executive, so it's really funny to move that, and both, the diversity is very different depending on where you are. So I actually don't want to say that the movement for women's empowerment is particularly white. Or maybe let me reframe that, because this is not just about women's empowerment. It's about gender equality. Those two go hand in hand, but they're not the same. It's not just two sexes. So it is about the gender equality, and the gender equality is a win-win for both men and for women and for governments and for business and for society at large. And that's what we're fighting for. It's the equality part. It's not just the diversity part. It's not just the women's empowerment. Women don't need fixing. The system needs fixing. So this is not a woman's issue. It's a societal and business imperative.
One thing we've heard about some people who, I wouldn't say are anti the movement, but say, you know, you're leaving the men behind. So Charles, how do you think is the best way to make sure men are part of the solution or part of the way to make it truly gender equal and not just a women empowerment movement?
We just need to invite them to the conversation, you know, and I see that at Philip Morris. When we started this conversation, many males were uncomfortable about it. And what I realized is males, normally they have, I would say, good intentions, but they're afraid of seeing something wrong. So what they do, they shut down. And that's something I really see a lot in the subject of inclusion and diversity, not being an English speaker, having worked all over the world. I think if we want to have a real conversation, we have to accept that some people will make mistakes in what they say and what they think, and we cannot blame them. And I think many males, actually, I see them stepping back out of that conversation because they say, I've everything to lose and I take a risk and I have not much to win about it. And I think it's us as bring them to the table, listening to them and helping them and not blaming them. I think you see it extremely well. It's not, no one has to be fixed in society. Male and female. I don't think women need to be fixed. I don't believe male needs to be fixed. We just need to have a proper dialogue with a lot of tolerance in what we do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And going back to another Japanese example, I've been over in Japan. You know, the Rugby World Cup's been on, in case you didn't notice, and we're a big sponsor. But I was talking about gender equality to our team there. And I actually started, and I looked around the room, and I said, okay, you know, we've got, it was at that time, I said, we've got 2 months paid paternity leave. I'm looking at the room, and I'm seeing many of you are young people who are going to be parents, and I'm particularly looking at all of the men here in the room and saying, I expect you to take that. You will be a good person, a good parent, a good citizen, and good for the company if you take that. So, you know, there was at first, you know, it was obviously not just including, but making them center stage, if you like. And when I got to the question times, one of the guys put his hand up and said to me, I want to recruit more women in my department, but the headhunters have sent me 57 CVs of men for my latest job vacancy. And I said, well, first of all, change your headhunter. And I said, but think about yourself. Who did you go to business school with? Who did you go to university with? You know, who does your mother, sister, daughter, know? Who do you know in the wider market? You know a whole range of women in this market who would probably be very well qualified to do the job that you have. So, don't feel powerless about it. Feel empowered to go out and get what you need. And I think it's a great conversation to have, and that's the kind of conversations we should be having.
Yeah. If I also may say one thing, anytime you're faced with losing a privilege you think is yours, you feel threatened. And if you're used to seeing yourself around the table, women can be threatening. Diversity in general can be threatening. Different thinking can be threatening. So, when you frame it as if men are afraid of women's empowerment, I'd rather say, well, we have equal rights, and that I can live my rights doesn't take away your rights. And it's not a zero-sum game. We know from all evidence that when there's diversity, including gender diversity, companies fare better. And that means as an employer and a leader there, you also fare better. Because down the road, if you don't have diversity, the chance that your company will close is actually pretty high. And that's also where I kind of see it. Yes, there's some individual work and soul searching that has to be done on all sides. Do women step in and step up? Do men welcome them or move aside? But it's also a board responsibility. I often get asked, in interviews, is kind of, can you please explain why it pays to have women in leadership? And I'm getting a little tired, because why do we have to keep justifying it? For me, the question is as much, why do boards keep allowing leadership to keep hiring people in the same image? So that's a board responsibility to get that diversity of all kinds.
Christy, what are your conversations like with the executives at CBS? Do you find that they are genuinely receptive and they want to change, or do you sometimes find like they're just giving lip service? How do you make sure?
Well, I am an executive, so I can say that
fellow executive.
I have to say that my conversations with my peers, we went through a very public Me Too series of events starting in 2017 into 2018 and 19. And that certainly led to the ouster of our CEO. It led to the ouster of on-camera talent and some other executives. I have to say that there isn't a ton of dialogue within CBS about those issues. Everybody is very focused on how do we move the business forward, but where I can make an impact in this day in and day out is in who I hire, how they treat their employees, and when there is a problem, moving as quickly as is humanly possible and being very firm about it. And sometimes it can be a slow process when you are investigating an allegation, and I do believe that allegations should be thoroughly investigated so that we don't have situations of unfairness. But once you know what the facts are, you really have to take swift action.
We've heard some people saying that the Time's Up movement, the Me Too movement, is going too far. How do we maybe I'll rephrase this, but obviously we should take allegations of sexual harassment, sexual assault incredibly seriously, and you would hope that any company would investigate them and do them well. But how do you take perhaps the sense of fear out of some people that this is somehow going to hurt them, or this is somehow going to hurt the gender equality movement?
Well, I think it is hurting it. I mean,
Why?
I think, I was just listening to Sheryl Sandberg in the FQ Lounge before this, and she was saying that there's some data coming out that 60% of American male executives are saying they feel uncomfortable traveling with younger females, and, she was saying, how many times have you been promoted by somebody who actually doesn't know you? So, we do have to address that. We have to make people feel comfortable. And she said, so it's not enough just to stop harassing people, we want them to be included as well. So we've done one piece of it. We have to get the next piece right. And I think that, you do have to make people feel comfortable. I know in my company, we were recently having that American training. We're an American company. So, you have that legal training where the lawyer comes in and talks to the senior management team and says, how things can operate and so on. And I could see, because I was sitting in the room, some of the guys sitting around the room kind of getting less and less comfortable about, the conversation. And I thought, this is a shame, because I know every one of them very well. And I don't think there's a single thing to worry about. And I actually got up and I went across to our CEO, who's a good friend of mine. And I gave him a hug and I said, there's nothing wrong with people, and he gave me a hug back, by the way. I said, there's nothing wrong with people in the workplace of different sexes who like each other's company, who feel comfortable in each other's presence, and, would be okay giving you a hug. Get over it. That's not what people are talking about. And actually, there was a visible relaxation in the room. And I actually think that it's very much up to female executives, by the way, to do this kind of thing. Because let's be grown up about it. Because that's not what we're talking about.
I also think, of course, it's also good to kind of stretch it a little bit, but it's not the Me Too movement that we're calling sexual harassment. out that's a problem. It's the sexual harassment. You know, that's the basics. And then as a company, and you know, I had an organization, we've also been through the training and what you need to do and all of that. That is needed, but it's also the culture change. You know, if you come from that culture where it's okay or where you don't call it out, and I know you've been through a tremendous change, that needs to happen. So it's not just legal, it's not just, but it's also that if you see something, say it.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think that does happen in companies where you know the difference between sexual harassment and actually being comfortable with each other. Yeah, that gets called out more in that kind of company because it's not tolerated.
Funny story about the training, sexual harassment training, which many companies have as it's an automated sort of slideshow that you go through with videos, etc. And the one that New York State mandated that the training must be 2.5 hours. So what they did year over year was they just slowed down the slideshow so that if you had answered the question, you literally could not advance the thing until, I don't know, 30 seconds had passed, so that it would take you 2.5 hours, no matter how fast you read or even if you answered everything correctly. So what that did is it made everybody insane because they couldn't get through the training, which is, these videos tend to be, they seem somewhat simplistic, I think, just to a lot of people. And so one of the things, this is what we used, and this was, I think, a way to comply without having to completely redo the training. But one of the things that really is needed is a better way to go about training, and what's commonly available it doesn't seem to be adequate. So I think that's an area that really needs some work.
Yeah. So I think the Me Too movement was needed. I think there was a time where enough was enough, and it has to be on the public place. And I think it was a wake-up call for many. So, and I think that's something very important. Now, and I agree with you, it's what's next. And I think we have to move out of only talking about diversity, and one day we'll have to talk about inclusion. Because we have to remember diversity is a mean, but the end is inclusion. And diversity is about creating a mix. Inclusion is how do we make this mix work together? And I think that's the question we need to frame ourselves. How do we include everybody into that conversation? Having different opinions, we don't have to agree. We just need to be able to express and to be listened.
I wanted to, since I think we're approaching towards the end of our time, one thing we haven't touched on is the pay gap. So how to really reduce the pay gap. Is the answer to the pay gap question making salaries public? Is that the only way we can go about doing it?
Wonderful question, and there's no simple answer, but we have the toolbox. We know what it takes. So yes, pay audit and transparency is one step. That can work somewhere. You need to also to look at, well, the pay equity, of course. Then you need to look at the pipeline, because what we say, kind of what you mentioned is, we have for the exact same work, we have equal pay. Yeah, but if you have only women in the lower paid caterers and men in the higher paid, you don't have pay equity. So it's equal work for equal pay for equal value of work. So it's also looking where are women, where are men, leadership, not leadership. So you have to look at the exact thing that can target pay, the things that target company culture, the things that target pipeline, the things that target management, responsibility. You can look at tools, you can look at, do you tie it to bonuses and promotions? You used your eye as the boss, so they knew they would be watched. Another way is to tie it to your bonus. Because I hear them all the time, we didn't get qualified female candidates. It's kind of, and that, if you only define qualified in your own image, then you don't have the breadth of competencies you'll need for the future.
You know, I agree with all of this. I think that it's not a simple thing, but I think that if you think about your company and the levels in your company, it seems to be sort of fairly straightforward for most companies to have 50-50 at the entry level. The question is, then as you're going up each level in your company, what you see is a fall off in the number of women, and every company looks like this. And then you have to ask yourself, you know, where is that happening and why is that happening? Because that is the way you will address the gender pay gap, because the gender pay gap is about who's at the top and who's not. And it's the only way to do it, and it will take time for companies to do this. But I think you're right. Everybody, you know, their tools are there, we know how to do it. By the way, I heard a great thing about diversity and inclusion, that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion's being asked to dance, which I actually think is a really nice way of kind of putting it.
So, Charles, at PMI, how are you trying to address the gender pay gap? Are you doing audits? How do you, from an HR perspective, address it?
Well, so first, I think there's two different steps. So we got the equal salary, and that's not the pay gap. That's only one step into that. The only way to address this is exactly what we just discussed, is to have companies who are flexible enough to find solutions for women when they go pregnancy or different time, be back and be able to continue their career and move to the top. And you know, I think we have all the tools. We just have to make it happen. You know, and I think that's we should stop talking. We should start acting. And I think in that space, there's a lot of talk. There's not enough act. And we need to move away of talking and start acting.
Now, before we wrap up here, now, Katja, you gave a very good point when we were talking backstage, that we need to not just have these conversations, but also have action items. So I hope we could all go down the line here and tell the audience and also ourselves what we can do in the next year. A specific action item. It could even be just one thing that people could do that you think could help us achieve gender equality. Now, we obviously will not reach it probably in the next year, but that would help us all get at least one step closer. Whoever wants to start, please.
Well, I think measuring exactly where you are in your company, and you know, one of the things that I said we were doing was going to gender-neutral maternity and paternity leave. So I think that's the most exciting thing that we'll do this year.
So I have a tweet and a message. And the tweet is, gender equality is not a woman's problem. It's a business issue and a societal imperative. Hashtag SIGEF 20. And the message is, or my ask to you is, because you're all powerful people, you would not be here if you were not powerful. So my question and my ask is, how are you going to use your power for good? How are you going to use your power as an individual, as a leader, to really push this forward? This is not going to change unless we take personal responsibility. We cannot wait for a system fix that somebody else comes, because it's at home, it's how we bring up our sons and our daughters, it's what opportunities we give them. It's also in the workplace, how do we interact, but it's also the leadership. How do I take all the tools we know and can prove works and actually activate them? Don't jump where it's easiest, but do that analysis and activate those tools. You will be richer and better from it. So how are you going to use your power?
I'm going to make a suggestion to read the book Women in Power by Mary Beard, who's appearing this afternoon at the Congress Center talking about the history of feminism in the West. It's a really short book. It's 2 lectures that she gave as a professor of classics. And it really changed my thinking about gender equality, in that she describes that misogyny is, obviously more than 2,000 years old. It is as old as Homer. It starts with the Odyssey. And what we're up against culturally in terms of misogyny is so ingrained societally and culturally. I would encourage everybody to take action, but also to understand that this is not a, well, Me Too came out and everything's fixed. This is going to take some time, and there are a lot of different actions that we all can take to make a difference.
I think the first action is, and I think you refer to that, I would suggest every single senior executive across the globe to have a training on unconscious bias. That's the way I started my journey on inclusion and diversity. And I was absolutely convinced I had no bias on women. I was convinced I have no bias on the LGBT community. I was convinced I have no bias on male. And I discovered that we all have plenty of bias. And I think it's a very good way of starting to know yourself. Because if you know yourself, you can make sure at least you don't replicate what, the mistakes you could have done in the past. So bias, I think actually bias should be even, unconscious bias, we should train our kids at school on this one. Because that's the most important step. Know yourself in order to make sure you don't harm others.
Thank you all so much for your time, and thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, panelists and moderator, for an excellent discussion on women empowerment. We are at the end of our program, and just to recap, we covered the gamut of the 4 content pillars that we set forth at the morning's, at the commencement. That was disruptive technology, inclusive finance, the SDGs, and women empowerment. I thank you all for coming, for your participation, and I hope you found the panel conversations an inspiring call to action to make positive change. Now, to officially close out the forum, I'd like to invite back to the podium the founder of you and the organizer of SIGEF, Jonathan Peretti, to the podium to give some final closing remarks, and we'll end the day. Thank you.
Dear friends, so I think it was a big challenge to be able to welcome almost 20 speakers from different parts of the world in a morning, starting at 7 a.m. and having been able, to move from disruptive technologies to the future of finance, crossing over for how leveraging, the SDGs to open new paths for sustainability, and closing with the woman empowerment and how this can be a source for new hope for a better world. So we have demonstrated that we have a vast amount of visionaries, change makers, people that are passionate and capable to execute with their commitment to make an impact that will benefit all. We have seen as well that all those sectors are interconnected. All those aspects is actually how can we shape the future and how can we make this future more inclusive. So I want to thank all of you, the ones that have been attending, the ones that took the time, the ones that are watching on our social network, on OU, with the live stream. I will thank all of the people that will leverage the opportunity to take the day-to-day as a start of a new journey to contribute to make a better future at every level. So let's look for the future with hope. Let's see what steps, whatever small, can make you and can make us climb a mountain of positivity, of empathy, of inclusion, and of diversity. I want to thank as well the different people and participants that have made these events a reality. First of all, I want to thank the OU team, my team, the people that have been committed to support me in that mission. I want to support as well the Kirchner Museum and all their team that were very brave, very courageous to stay, like with us at no time. This is, very humbling to see people that are most of the time in the backstage, but that enable that backstage to transform into a very successful and positive, conference. Lastly, I want to thank the ones that have been able to support us, to support OU and OU Foundation to fund this event, namely Philip Morris International, Nespresso, Watergen, and some others from different parts of the world. Lastly, I want to salute and say a great thanks for Sarah. Sarah, you have made an absolutely amazing Master of Ceremony, and I look for, and with all of us, for next edition next year, so we can have a continuity of SIGEF in Davos, we can have a continuity of this conference to bring more stakeholders from all backgrounds, all continents, to think and work on the world we have to build for tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Let's enjoy a few more minutes of connecting for good, and let's see each other very soon in the future. Thank you very much. Maybe we will call all the speakers to come on stage for a last picture. All of the speakers that are still in the room, please.